This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Hound, and today is Monday, and that means it's time for the 522nd MTG Top 10. Most of the time this series looks at good cards, but sometimes it's fun to take a break from that and look at awful cards, and that's what we're doing today with a look at the worst white creatures ever. White is one of the best colors for creatures, especially when it comes to smaller ones, but that doesn't mean every white creature is good, far from it. To be eligible for this list, a card had to have a mono-white identity and be a creature. That means over 2,100 cards were eligible for this list, and when there's that many of anything, there are bound to be some awful cards in there. While the cards that appear in this list and how they rank is ultimately based on my opinion, I do use some data to help me make my selections. A card can't be on this list if it has ever appeared in a tournament level deck, and it also can't be here if it's widely played in EDH. It also can't really be a card that makes the cut in Limited. Alright, let's dive in with a look at the 10 worst white creatures in all of Magic. At number 10, it is Kildoren Guard. This creature starts with bad stats as a 2-mana 1/1, and then it has an awful ability. Tapping to give a creature +1/+1 itself isn't bad, but then there are some serious limitations and even a downside that come with this ability. You can only use the ability during combat, and you can only use it if your opponent doesn't have snowlands. Limiting it only to combat really telegraphs for your opponent when you're going to use the ability, and the snowland limitation is really frustrating, especially for a card from Ice Age, a set with snowlands everywhere. But the problems with this card don't end there. If the creature you buff with the guard dies, you lose the guard too. So you're risking a 2-for-1 for an extremely narrow buff effect that won't even be usable a decent chunk of the time. Yeah, that's awful. Also, weirdly, this card has the human type these days, and I'm not sure that I'm looking at a human here. At number 9, I have Ivory Guardians. A 6-mana 3/3 is rough, and the big upside this card offers you is protection from red and +1/+1 if your opponent has a red permanent. So yeah, the idea here is that this really hoses red decks and you can side it in against them or whatever, but it's pretty awful at doing what it was designed to do because it's so woefully overcosted. It doesn't help either that most red decks tend to be pretty fast, so a 6-mana card that hates on red isn't exactly going to do much to stop them. At number 8, it is Grassland Crusader. 6 mana for a 2/4 is a horrible place to start, and while the Crusader's text box is all upside, it really doesn't do enough to overcome how expensive this card is. The Crusader can tap to give a soldier or an elf +2/+2. That's a significant buff for sure, but even if the card could tap to give anything +2/+2, it wouldn't be considered good, so restricting it to 2 creature types is downright dreadful. People play soldier decks in EDH too, but as you can see, almost no one plays with the Crusader there. No one played it in its limited format either, which was populated with both elves and soldiers. At number 7, I have Elder Landworm. This 7-mana 5/5, sadly, has one of the most efficient stat lines of any card on the list, and it can even trample. Unfortunately, it also has Defender, and it can only get rid of it by blocking. Even if this didn't have Defender at all, it would be considered a bad card, but with a Defender downside, it's downright awful. At number 6, I have Righteous Avengers. This is another creature that starts with a horrendous stat line. A 5-mana 3/1 is absolutely abysmal. It is very easy to trade up to kill this. The only upside this creature offers is Planeswalk, and hey, that means it can't be blocked by someone who has a Plains in play, but that doesn't change the fact that with 1 toughness, the Avengers die to a whole lot of things that only cost 1 mana. So it isn't exactly a card you want to be using, even if you're playing against an opponent who has Plains. At number 5, I have Takenos Cavalry. We have another big loser here when it comes to the stat line, as this is a 4-mana 1/1. It does come with Bushido, which means it becomes a 2/2 when it becomes blocked or blocks, and I guess that's something. It can also tap to do 1 damage to attacking or blocking spirits. That ability wouldn't be very good if it could hit any creature, so it definitely isn't good that it can only hit creatures with 1 type. I think one of the best indicators of how bad this card is the fact that even in Kamigawa Limited, a format with tons of spirits, no one played the Cavalry. That was basically the best environment the Cavalry will ever experience, and it was still awful. It sees play in more EDH decks than any other card on the list, but that's only because people are really starved for Samurais, but I think those people are doing it wrong. Your Samurai deck would be way better if you didn't run Takenos Cavalry. You're better off replacing it with a basic Plains. At number 4, I have Samite Alchemist. We have another bad stat line here. This is a 4-mana 0/2. It does come with an ability, but it is pretty bad. You can pay 2 white and tap it to prevent 4 damage that would be dealt to a creature you control. If the ability stopped there, it would actually be good enough for this card to avoid making the list, but it doesn't. It also makes it so the creature doesn't untap during your next untap step. That is a pretty massive downside to add to an ability that already isn't amazing, especially on a 4-mana 0/2. At number 3, it is Avon Trooper. This is a 4-mana 1/1 with flying, so it better have a good ability, but given that it's on this list, you know it doesn't. You can pay 2 generic and a white and discard a card from your hand to give it +1/+2. That is incredibly inefficient. Even if you remove the discard a card part of the effect, it isn't impressive. There is actually a little bit of upside to be gained by such an effect, of course, like putting things in your graveyard that you want to reanimate or casting things with madness, but there are so many other cards out there that let you discard without paying a mana cost that this isn't worth it in any way, shape, or form. It's pretty hilarious to compare it to another white creature from the same block, Patrol Hound. This costs half the mana, has double the stats, and can discard cards for no cost at all while gaining first strike. At number 2, it is Alabaster Leech. Hey look, finally a card with a good stat line. This bad boy is a 1-mana 1/3, but the downside here is so bad that it doesn't matter. It makes all of your white spells cost 1 additional mana. It isn't worth adding a huge tax to a bunch of your cards just so you can play a 1/3 for 1. It is especially hilarious to compare the Leech to a recent card printed at Common, Staunch Shieldmate, a 1-mana 1/3 that comes with no downside at all, and that card isn't even anything special. It only sees play in the 66 EDH decks it is in because it's so awful, it's a nice card to give to your opponent with Zedru. And at number 1, it is Akron Legionnaire. This thing is awful, and I think it's way worse than every other card on the list. I don't think any other card on the list is nearly as bad as this one. This 8-mana 8/4 has a text box that is entirely downside, and the downside is just massive. It makes it so you can't attack with a creature unless it's named Akron Legionnaire or is an artifact creature. So yeah, you could build around the Legionnaire really hard and put him at the top of your curve in an artifact creature deck, I guess, and then the downside doesn't matter, but you did a ton of work to make this card's downside go away, and you're still just getting an 8-mana 8/4 for your efforts, so it wasn't worth it. So, those are the 10 worst white creatures in the history of Magic. What do you think of my picks? Did I leave any out? Let me know in the comments. If you want to own any of these cards for some reason, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each of them. If you want to catch up on past MTG top 10s, including many more that look at bad cards, you should see the playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.